It was a warm evening in the spring of 1993 when a young housekeeper mysteriously vanished without a trace. She had been working for a prominent and affluent family in the hills of Los Angeles, and on that particular day, she simply failed to report for her scheduled shift. Her employers, assuming she'd taken a better opportunity or grown tired of the job, dismissed her absence as a sudden departure. They never thought to raise an alarm or file a report. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into years. No one heard from her again. Her name slowly faded into obscurity, another soul lost in the margins of a bustling city. In the early morning light of a crisp autumn day in 1998, Miguel Santos maneuvered a large yellow excavator through the rugged terrain of Griffith Park. The machine roared to life, churning up the earth in preparation for a new hiking trail designed to offer sweeping views of Los Angeles. The project was routine, and Miguel, with over 2 decades of experience operating heavy equipment, handled the controls with ease. But as the steel bucket carved through the soil, he felt the unmistakable jolt of metal hitting something it shouldn't have. The excavator's teeth caught on something solid. Curiosity piqued, Miguel powered down the machine and stepped out of the cab, squinting at the disturbed ground beneath him. The early sunlight cast elongated shadows across the dusty clearing. Grabbing a shovel from the equipment truck, he began to dig cautiously, sifting through the dirt where the excavator had stopped. The soil crumbled easily at first, until his blade struck something unnervingly smooth. Kneeling down, he brushed away the top layer of dust with his gloved hands, revealing a pale, bone-white curve. His breath caught. It was unmistakable. A human skull lay staring up at him from the shallow grave. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, stumbling back in horror. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone and dialed 911. 2 hours later, the once quiet work site buzzed with the intensity of a full-scale investigation. Bright yellow crime scene tape enclosed a 20-foot radius around the unearthed remains, while police cruisers and forensic vans crowded the makeshift staging area. Technicians in white coveralls moved deliberately through the scene, documenting every inch of disturbed soil and collecting evidence piece by piece. Detective Ana Rivas ducked beneath the tape and stepped into the cordoned area with purposeful strides. Dressed in tailored slacks and a worn leather jacket, Anna's appearance was as sharp as her instincts. Her jet-black hair was pulled tightly into a ponytail, a practical style that also revealed the delicate silver earrings her teenage daughter had gifted her the previous Christmas. She knelt beside the shallow grave, her eyes narrowing as she took in the decomposing remains partially shrouded in what was once a clear plastic sheeting, now stained gray with age and brittle from years underground. "What have we got?" she asked, directing the question to Officer Martinez, the first responder on the scene. "Construction crew found the bones around 7 a.m., Martinez replied, gesturing toward the disturbed area. "Preliminary assessment by the coroner says female, likely a young adult." Anna examined the bones carefully, her fingertips hovering near but never touching. The location was deeply unsettling. This part of the park was remote, hidden well beyond the reach of casual hikers, cloaked in dense brush and thick oak trees. Someone had chosen this site with great care. A moment later, Dr. Patricia Kim, the forensic anthropologist assigned to the department, arrived with her metal case in hand. "Female victim," she began clinically, kneeling beside Anna. "Between 20 and 30 years old based on skeletal development. She's been here no less than 4 years, possibly closer to 6. Dr. Kim pointed to the discolored plastic. "That wrapping preserved some soft tissue, but decomposition has taken its toll." She gestured to the skull. "Significant blunt force trauma to the back of the head, specifically the occipital bone. This woman didn't die by accident." As she examined the skeletal structure, Dr. Kim continued, "Judging from the pelvis and other features, she was likely Hispanic, mid-20s, stood about 5'4" at the time of death." She ran her fingers along the frayed remnants of fabric clinging to the bones. given the state of the clothing and body, I'd estimate she died about 5 years ago. Anna processed the information quickly. Whoever had committed this crime had assumed their secret would stay buried, undisturbed in this secluded part of the park. "There's more," Dr. Kim added, pointing to the victim's fingernails. "We found dried biological material lodged under several nails, possibly blood or skin cells." Anna's eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. "If she fought back, we might have enough to extract DNA," she said, already calculating the next steps. "How soon can we get results?" "I can get you preliminary findings in 48 hours, Dr. Kim replied. "A complete analysis will take longer." Anna rose and walked toward the evidence table, where technicians had begun laying out items recovered from the grave. "Any personal effects?" she asked. "Just these," Dr. Kim answered, holding up a tarnished silver locket encased in a plastic bag and a deteriorated bus pass dated 1993. The locket bore a faint engraving, difficult to read but unmistakable. Bel Duarte. Anna stared at the name, committing it to memory. She circled the site, analyzing the terrain. The grave had been dug in a natural hollow, ringed by heavy vegetation. There were no visible trails nearby, no signs of frequent foot traffic. "The killer knew this place," she said to Martinez. "This wasn't random. It was planned." From the ridge, she looked out over the sprawling city of Los Angeles. Sunlight glinted off the distant skyscrapers downtown. Down there, life moved on. People went to work, sat in traffic, drank coffee in cafes, unaware that this forgotten woman had been lying in the hills, hidden from sight and memory, for 5 years. Back at LAPD headquarters, Anna passed through the glass doors and made her way to the detective's bullpen. She needed to dig through the archives to see if this mystery woman had ever been reported missing. She logged into the system and typed the name from the locket, Marble Duarte. No results. She tried alternative spellings, Maria Duarte, Myra Duarte, and eventually just Duarte, with a date range from 1992 to 1995. Still nothing. Frustrated but undeterred, she broadened her search, filtering for missing Hispanic women in their 20s who had disappeared within that time frame. Dozens of names appeared on her screen. Some had been found and returned home. Others had vanished into thin air, their files collecting dust. Anna scrolled through case after case, scanning grainy photos and sparse notes, searching for a match. Detective Ray Morrison, holding a steaming coffee mug, paused at her desk. "Got something new?" he asked. "Yeah," she replied without looking up. "Found a body in Griffith Park. Young Latina has been dead for about 5 years. Ray's brow furrowed slightly. 5 years is a long time. Any leads? Anna shook her head, still scanning through missing persons data. Nothing yet. No matches in the database. No one seems to have reported her missing under that name or anything close. Ray leaned against her desk, thinking. Might have been undocumented, or maybe she was working under an alias. Happens more than people realize. Anna nodded, her jaw tightening. She'd seen it before. Women working low-wage jobs, off the books, invisible to the systems meant to protect them. No family, no papers, no record. She sat back in her chair, eyes still fixed on the screen, and exhaled deeply. Someone out there had buried this woman like a secret, and for 5 long years it had worked. But now, the earth had given her up. And Ana Rivas was going to make sure that whoever was responsible would be brought to justice. Anna slowly turned the monitor toward Ray so he could examine the search results for himself. "The problem is," she said, "there's no record of anyone ever filing a missing persons report for her." Ray leaned in, his brow creased in disbelief. "No one? Not a single person? No family, no friends, not even an employer?" Anna shook her head slightly, frustration tugging at her features. "That's exactly what I need to figure out. All I have is the name on a worn-out locket." She closed the missing persons database and opened a new browser window, shifting her focus to broader municipal and historical archives. The hours began to slip by as she combed through city records, public databases, and transportation logs, anything that could offer even the faintest trail. One of the few clues at the crime scene had been a decayed bus pass fragment. It bore partial text, Metro, and a barely legible date, 1993. While an old pass wouldn't reveal her identity, it might hint at where she had traveled, lived, or worked during that year. Anna reached out to the Metro Transit Authority and was eventually connected with a record supervisor named Janet Phillips. After Anna explained the purpose of her call and the sensitivity of the investigation, Janet agreed to help. She began by searching their employment database for the name Marble Dwart. "I'm not finding anyone with that name listed as an employee," Janet said, her voice muffled by the clatter of keys in the background. "But let me try something else. We sometimes kept emergency contact information for registered pass holders, especially those who used refillable cards. It's a stretch, especially from that long ago, but it's worth checking." Anna tapped her pen nervously as she waited. Outside her office window, shadows lengthened across the adjacent parking structure. Her unmarked Crown Victoria sat beneath a flickering light, a quiet sentinel to a case that was anything but. Then Janet's voice returned, sharper, more focused. "Hold on, I think we've got something. There's a 1993 pass registered under the name Marble Dwart. The listed address is in Highland Park. Emergency contact, a Carmen Dwart. Same address." Anna's heart jumped. She quickly jotted the information into her notebook. This was the first solid lead. The Highland Park address led her to a modest apartment complex on Avenue 50. Its exterior painted a faded yellow and fortified with black iron bars over the windows. Anna parked across the street and took a few moments to observe the surroundings. Neat gardens, children's bicycles tipped on their sides, and laundry fluttering from balconies told her this was a working-class neighborhood, a community of people who likely watched out for one another but stayed under the radar. She crossed the street and entered the front walkway. The mailboxes were old, their metal casings chipped and dented from years of use. Anna pressed the buzzer for the building manager. After a few moments, the door opened to reveal an older man with sagging shoulders, wearing a stained undershirt and holding a half-empty can of soda. "You selling something?" he asked gruffly. Anna flashed her badge. "LAPD. I'm looking for information about a former tenant, Marble Dwart. She lived here back in 1993. The man's face tightened. "Immigration." "Homicide," Anna corrected gently. "Marble is dead. I'm trying to contact her family." The suspicion in his eyes melted into something softer, touched with sorrow. "Damn," he muttered. "She was just a kid. Lived in 2B with 2 other girls. One day she just vanished. Her roommate said she probably went back to Mexico or maybe found another job and moved. That was the last anyone saw of her." Anna pulled out her notepad. "Do you remember their names?" "One was Rosa something. The other, I can't recall. But Rosa still lives around here. Works at a grocery store down on Figueroa." Following his directions, Anna made her way to the small market, a local place nestled between a laundromat and a taqueria. Inside, she found Rosa Hernandez stocking tomatoes on a display shelf. When Anna showed her badge, Rosa went pale, her body freezing with silent dread. "It's not immigration," Anna assured her quickly. "I'm here about Marble." Rosa's tense expression softened. She set the box of produce aside. "Marble was my friend, a good person. She worked hard, sent money to her family back in Mexico." "Did she ever talk about anyone bothering her?" Anna asked. "Boyfriends? Employers?" Rosa shook her head. "Number. She was happy those last few months. Said she'd gotten a new job, housekeeping for a wealthy family in Bear. They treated her better than the hotel did. Paid her well. She was saving up to help her sister. Her sister, Carmen. Yes, younger than us, 16, maybe 17. Marble talked about putting her through high school. Anna leaned in slightly. Do you know how I might find Carmen? Rosa glanced around the market, lowering her voice. Last I heard, she was working at a restaurant downtown, a place called El Centro, near Civic Center, but that was a few years ago. The restaurant sat along a busy stretch of Spring Street. El Centro's entrance was narrow, and the warm scent of grilled carne asada and corn tortillas welcomed Anna as she stepped inside. A young woman approached with menus in hand. Her features bore a striking resemblance to the photos of Marbell. Table for one? She asked in softly accented English. Anna didn't take the menus. She showed her badge. Detective Rivas, LAPD, are you Carmen Duarte? The woman froze. Menus clutched to her chest. Her lips parted, but no words came out. What's wrong? What happened? She whispered. Can we talk in private? Carmen led Anna through the kitchen to a cramped office at the back of the restaurant. Once the door was shut, she turned, anxiety clouding her deep brown eyes. Is this about my sister? Did something happen to Marble? Anna took a deep breath. This was the part of the job that never got easier. Carmen, I'm sorry. Earlier today, we discovered your sister's remains in Griffith Park. We believe she died about 5 years ago. Carmen stared at her in silence, unblinking. When comprehension struck, it shattered her. She dropped into the office chair and broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, her grief echoing through the cramped space. I knew it, she choked out. I always knew something was wrong. She would never just leave me? Never. Anna gave her time to grieve before asking gentle, open-ended questions. Carmen confirmed that Marble had been 26 when she disappeared in October 1993. She'd been excited about her new job, working for a family in the Bear area. She said they were kind, paid her well. She even got to eat dinner with them sometimes, Carmen recalled, wiping her eyes. She was saving to bring our mother over from Mexico. She wanted to make a better life, for all of us. Carmen stood slowly, her voice steadier now, though her eyes were still red. Please, she said, find out what happened to her. She didn't deserve that. She was the best person I knew. Anna gave a quiet nod. We'll do everything we can. As she walked back to her car, Anna felt the weight of Carmen's words settle on her shoulders. The image of Marble's life, so full of promise, ambition, and love, had begun to take shape. But the question that still haunted her was the most important one. Who had stolen that future? Did Marble ever mention the name of the family she worked for? Anna asked gently, watching as Carmen wiped her eyes with the tissue she'd handed her earlier. Carmen shook her head slowly. She was always really careful about that, she replied. Said they valued their privacy, but she did tell me the man she worked for was in real estate. Carmen's voice was thick with emotion, but steady. Was there anything unusual in her behavior during those last few weeks? Anything that made you worry? Anna continued. No, Carmen said, her voice cracking slightly. That's what makes it so hard. She was happy, really happy. It was the first time since we came here that I saw her excited about the future. Carmen's eyes grew distant as she recalled those final days. She even bought herself some new clothes. I was taking English classes in the evenings. Said she wanted to better herself, to move up someday and maybe find a better position. She stood and walked to the small window overlooking the bustle of the street outside, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. The last time I heard from her was October 14th, 1993. It was a Thursday night. Carmen's voice became soft, almost reverent. She called me after dinner, told me she'd be working late the next day, said the family was throwing some fancy dinner party, and she had to help prepare, but she didn't mind. She actually sounded excited. Said she might get a bonus. She was going to use the money to buy me some school clothes. Carmen turned back toward Anna, her face wet with fresh tears. She never came home. What did you do when she didn't come back? Anna asked, her tone gentle but persistent. I waited, Carmen said. All weekend. I was worried, but I didn't know what to do. On Monday, I went to her old job at the hotel, hoping maybe she'd gone back. But they said she had quit weeks earlier to work for this family. I didn't know how to reach them. I was just 17 and her voice faltered. I was scared to call the police. Anna nodded slowly, understanding the unspoken truth. Because of your immigration status. Carmen confirmed it with a slight nod. Yeah, I didn't want to get anyone in trouble. Rosa and the other girls told me Marble probably just got deported or found a better job somewhere else. That was common. People disappeared all the time and no one said anything. I kept hoping she'd call or write, but nothing ever came. Anna studied Carmen's face. 5 years of sorrow etched deep into her expression. Grief, guilt, and the hollow weight of not knowing. Carmen, I want you to know. We're going to find out who did this to her, but I need your help. Think carefully. Did she ever say anything at all, about the house she worked in? The family? The neighborhood? Anything that might help me figure out where she was? Carmen was silent for a long time, her eyes returning to the window. She watched the cars pass, the people walking along the sidewalks, lost in memory. Finally, she spoke. There was one thing. I remember she told me once about their backyard. Said it had a pool, shaped like a kidney. Carmen's voice softened with memory. And she said that from the backyard, she could see the Hollywood sign. She told me it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Anna's heart raced. In a sprawling city like Los Angeles, a detail like that could narrow down possibilities considerably. A view of the Hollywood sign, a kidney-shaped pool. Those were specific and searchable. That evening, Anna returned to the precinct and logged into the city's property database. For the next 3 hours, she cross-referenced architectural plans, zoning permits, and aerial photographs. She filtered for homes in the bare neighborhood that had pools matching that shape and elevation high enough to offer a view of the Hollywood sign. It was tedious work, but eventually she found what she was looking for. 12 potential matches. One stood out. A Tudor-style mansion tucked along a private road, boasting a pool in that very shape and the iconic sign clearly visible from its yard. Found you, she whispered to herself. The next morning, Anna drove out to Bear. The streets wound upward, narrowing into a single-lane drive flanked by towering hedges. Eventually, she reached a pair of wrought iron gates. Behind them loomed an imposing house with steep gables and ivy-covered walls. She pressed the intercom button at the gate. After several rings, a woman's voice answered, "Hello. This is Detective Ana Rivas with the LAPD," she said. "I need to speak with Mr. and Mrs. Delcroix regarding a former employee." There was a pause. What kind of employee? A housekeeper who worked here in 1993. It's in connection with a homicide investigation. Another pause, longer this time. Then a buzz as the gate opened. Anna parked her car and walked up the cobbled driveway. To her surprise, the door was opened not by staff, but by the lady of the house herself. Geneva Delcroix was elegant and composed, dressed in a tailored blouse and silk scarf. "Detective Rivas," she said with polite curiosity, "please come in. I must say this is quite unexpected. Is your husband available? I'd like to speak with both of you." "Of course," Geneva replied. "Charles is in his study. I'll go get him." As Geneva disappeared into the house, Anna scanned the foyer. Richly furnished with polished wood floors and antiques, it radiated wealth. A photograph on a side table caught her attention. Geneva and Charles dressed for an evening event, standing with a Latino man in a black suit who appeared slightly older. He stood behind the couple in the deferential manner of a household employee, but the inclusion in the photo implied trust, maybe even loyalty. Moments later, Geneva returned with her husband. Charles Delcroix was tall, silver-haired, and sharply dressed despite it being a quiet Friday afternoon. He moved with the assuredness of someone used to giving orders, not receiving them. "Thank you for seeing me," Anna said, accepting his firm handshake. "I'm investigating the death of a young woman named Marble Duarte. Our records show she worked here as a housekeeper in 1993. Charles and Geneva exchanged a glance. Then Geneva's hand flew to her mouth. "Marble," she said, her voice tinged with surprise. "Oh my goodness. What happened?" "She was murdered," Anna replied. "Her remains were discovered yesterday in Griffith Park." Geneva sank into a nearby chair, visibly shaken. "That's terrible. She was such a sweet girl." Charles stood behind his wife, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Detective, I'm not sure how much help we can be. That was over 5 years ago. We've had several housekeepers since then." "I understand. But anything you remember could be useful. When did she stop working for you?" Geneva looked up. "It was sometime in the fall. October, maybe. She just stopped showing up one day. We thought maybe she had immigration problems or found another job." "Did you report her disappearance?" Charles answered this time. "We didn't go through an agency. She was recommended by someone we know at the country club. When she didn't come back, we assumed she'd moved on. That's quite common in our experience." Anna took mental note of his dismissive tone. Was there any indication of a problem? Any tension or conflict in the household? "Not at all," Geneva said, her voice regaining composure. "She was wonderful, hard-working, polite, and completely trustworthy. I actually became quite fond of her." Her voice wavered, and for a moment, Anna saw genuine emotion flash across her face. "She reminded me a little of the housekeeper my grandmother had when I was a child," Geneva said quietly, the words slipping out as if talking to herself. Her voice trembled with a mix of nostalgia and heartbreak. Anna turned her attention to Charles Delcroix, who had moved away from the center of the room and was now standing stiffly near the tall windows, staring out at the manicured garden beyond. "Mr. Delcroix," Anna said carefully, "did you interact with Marble much while she was employed here?" Charles turned slowly. Anna noticed a sheen of sweat beginning to form on his forehead, unusual given the cool, conditioned air in the room. "Not really," he answered with a small, forced chuckle. "I typically left the domestic arrangements to Geneva. She managed the staff. But of course, I saw Marble around the house. She was here several days a week." "Would you say you got to know her?" Anna pressed. "She seemed like a pleasant young woman," he replied, loosening his tie slightly. "Quiet, respectful, always polite." He shifted his weight uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding direct contact. "Detective, is there a particular reason you're focusing so intently on our household? I would imagine that someone in her situation would have crossed paths with many people." The defensiveness in his tone was unmistakable. Anna's instincts, honed by years of interrogation experience, kicked in. In her experience, truly innocent people welcomed police inquiries. They offered details, asked questions, expressed concern. But Charles was growing more agitated by the minute. "I'm simply trying to reconstruct Marble's final days," she said evenly. "Establishing a clear timeline is critical. Can you remember the last specific date she worked here?" Charles hesitated, then blurted, "October 15th. He blinked rapidly and added, "I think it was around then." "A Friday?" Anna raised an eyebrow. "You sound very certain." He swallowed. "Well, we were preparing for a dinner party that weekend. Geneva was upset that Marble didn't show up to help." "That's true," Geneva interjected from her chair. "I had to make all the arrangements myself at the last minute. It was incredibly stressful." Anna made a note. Then she shifted her focus back to Charles. She began to ask more questions. What he remembered about Marble, whether she had ever expressed concerns, and how often they spoke. Charles's responses grew increasingly vague. He began stammering, his answers circuitous and incomplete. Sweat now visibly dampened the underarms of his finely pressed shirt, and he kept glancing toward the hallway, as though calculating the quickest route out of the conversation. It was time for a more direct approach. "Mr. Delqua," Anna said calmly, "I need to ask you directly about the nature of your relationship with Marbel Dwart." Charles blinked. "I don't understand what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything," Anna said, her voice steady. "I'm asking." Charles opened his mouth as if to deny everything, but then his shoulders sagged. He turned away and slowly walked across the room, stopping in front of a large family portrait. He stared at it for a long moment. Geneva watched him, her face pale, her jaw clenched. "Charles?" Her voice cracked slightly, a tremor of suspicion, perhaps realization. Charles turned to face them both. His face was flushed, not with heat, but with something much deeper. Shame, perhaps. "I need to be honest," he said, his voice low. "Yes, I had a personal relationship with Marbel. We were involved." The silence in the room was absolute. Geneva sat frozen, eyes wide and unblinking. Her face turned white, then red, cycling through disbelief, rage, and heartbreak too quickly for words to catch up. "It started a few months after she began working here," Charles continued. "She was kind, beautiful, and he hesitated. "I was lonely. Geneva spends so much time with her charity events and galas." "Don't," Geneva said, standing slowly. Her fists were clenched at her sides. "Don't you dare blame me. You did this, in our home, with someone we welcomed." "I never meant for it to happen," Charles stammered. "Stop talking," Geneva snapped, her voice sharp as glass. Anna, maintaining her composure, spoke up. "Mrs. Delqua, I know this is incredibly difficult, but I have to ask, did you have any idea about your husband's involvement with Marbel?" Geneva's body was rigid. "None," she replied. "I trusted her. I even gave her some of my old jewelry. I thought she was lovely, hard-working, and now?" She shook her head in disbelief. "I can't believe this." Anna turned back to Charles. "What happened on the night of October 15th? Charles collapsed into an armchair, covering his face with both hands. His voice was muffled. "We were supposed to meet, after the preparations were done. Same place as always, a hotel in Beverly Hills. She didn't show." "Which hotel?" Anna asked. "The Carlisle," he said. "We'd been meeting there once or twice a week. When she didn't show, what did you do?" "I called the house," Charles replied, looking at Geneva again. "Geneva told me Marbel hadn't come in that day, so I assumed maybe she had second thoughts. Maybe she ended things without telling me. You didn't think to look for her? To file a report?" Charles spread his hands. "How could I? I would have had to admit everything. My affair, my lies, my breach of trust. My entire life would have come crashing down." Anna said nothing. The silence that followed was louder than any accusation. She turned back to Geneva, whose eyes now burned with quiet fury. "Mrs. Delqua, can you account for your whereabouts on October 15th? "I was here," Geneva said firmly, "preparing for the party. 12 guests were expected the next day. I spent the entire evening arranging flowers, cooking, setting the table. All of it alone because my housekeeper didn't show." The bitter twist in her voice was unmistakable. As Anna prepared to wrap up the interview, something clicked in her mind. She crossed back to the piano and picked up the photo she'd noticed earlier. "Can you tell me who this is?" she asked, pointing to the third figure in the image, an older Latino man in a dark suit. Geneva gave it a brief glance. "That's Felix, our driver. Well, former driver. He retired a couple of years ago." "What's his full name?" "Felix Morales," Charles answered. "He worked for us for nearly 8 years." "Would Felix have known Marbel?" "Oh, yes," Geneva replied without hesitation. "He used to drive her to the market, sometimes to appointments. They were friendly. I think she confided in him more than she did in us." "Do you know where I can find him?" Anna asked. Geneva looked at Charles, who gave a weary shrug. "Last we heard, he moved back to live with his daughter in Pasadena. I might still have his address in our old personnel files." "I'll need that," Anna said. "And anything else you might remember. Any notes, calendars, or records from that period. Charles nodded slowly. I'll have our assistant dig through the archives. As Anna stepped outside into the bright daylight, she paused at the edge of the driveway and looked back at the house. Behind its pristine facade and manicured hedges, secrets had lived and died. Now, with one revelation behind her and more questions piling up, Anna knew the next step would be to track down Felix Morales, because someone had to know what truly happened that night, and Felix might be the key to unlocking the truth Marbel Duarte never got to tell. He often gave her rides from the bus station, especially when she worked late, Geneva explained, her voice distant as she recalled the details. And when we hosted events, he'd pitch in with heavy lifting, tables, decorations, that sort of thing. Anna scribbled down notes in her pad, circling the name, Felix Morales. Then she turned to Charles, leveling her gaze. Mr. Delacroix, I need to ask you directly, did you kill Marbel Duarte? Charles flinched as if struck. His eyes widened and his face went pale. Number, absolutely not. I cared about her, he said, almost breathless. When she vanished, I was devastated. But if I had said anything, come forward with the truth about our relationship, it would have ruined my life, my marriage, my business, everything. I understand, Anna replied, her tone neutral. But I'll need both of you to come to the station tomorrow to give formal statements. Neither protested. As Anna drove away from the Delacroix estate, her thoughts churned. The grand home behind her had been polished and perfect on the surface, but inside, it was rotting with secrets. And Anna couldn't shake the feeling that some of those secrets had led directly to Marbel's death. The next morning, Anna was at her desk reviewing case files when she received judicial approval to examine Charles Delacroix's financial records from the fall of 1993. What she uncovered was unexpected and suspicious. Between October 16th and the end of November, Charles had withdrawn over $15,000 in cash, 5 transactions spread across several banks. Later that week, Anna brought Charles back in for a follow-up interview. This time, the mood in the interview room was less cordial. Across from her, Charles sat rigidly, trying not to betray his discomfort. These large cash withdrawals, Anna said, laying the printed bank records on the table. What were they for? Charles glanced at the papers, then back at Anna. Business expenses, he said. In real estate, sometimes contractors or suppliers prefer to be paid in cash. It's not unusual. $15,000? Anna raised an eyebrow. All within a few weeks after your mistress disappears? That seems highly unusual. Charles's jaw tightened. I don't keep receipts from that long ago. I don't have that kind of documentation anymore. Anna didn't blink. Mr. Delacroix, I need you to understand how this looks. Your mistress disappears. A body is found. You made thousands of dollars in unexplained cash withdrawals during the same period. That isn't a coincidence. That's motive, opportunity, and cover-up. Charles leaned back, massaging his temples. Detective, I know it doesn't look good, but I didn't kill her. Anna said nothing, just stared, giving him room to reconsider. He didn't budge. Later that afternoon, Lieutenant Ray Morrison summoned Anna to his office. Morrison, a seasoned commander with over a decade in homicide, was known for giving his detectives wide discretion, but today, his tone was cautious. I've been getting calls, he began. What kind of calls? Anna asked. From the chief, from City Hall. Charles Delacroix's attorney reached out this morning, claims Charles is being harassed. Anna folded her arms. He's the prime suspect in a murder investigation. I know that, and I trust your instincts, Morrison said, raising a hand. But Delacroix's family is highly connected. He sits on several influential boards, has friends in politics, donated to multiple campaigns. This case is being watched. Are you telling me to drop it? Anna asked, her voice calm but firm. I'm telling you to be careful, Morrison replied. Make sure you have concrete, irrefutable evidence before you go any further. A wrongful arrest will bring the department a storm we don't want. Anna nodded, saying nothing. She understood the message. power protected its own. That evening, she sat alone at Mel's Diner, a classic late-night spot on Sunset Boulevard. Her red vinyl booth was tucked near the window, her case files spread across the table beside a barely touched turkey sandwich. She scanned her notes, witness statements, timestamps, lab reports, looking for anything she might have missed. Her phone rang. She answered instantly. "Detective Rivas," she said. "It's Dr. Kim," came the voice from the forensics lab. "We've finished testing the material from under the victim's fingernails." Anna grabbed a pen. "Tell me." "It's blood," Kim confirmed. "But it doesn't belong to the victim. It's from another female." Anna's pen froze above her notebook. "You're sure?" "Positive. We have a complete DNA profile, but the sample doesn't match anything in CODIS. No criminal records, no missing persons. It's a ghost." Anna leaned back. What she had hoped would be a breakthrough only complicated matters. A second woman's blood? If not Marble's, then whose? She paid for her food and stepped outside into the cool Los Angeles evening. The diner's neon lights flickered behind her as she crossed the parking lot toward her unmarked Crown Vic. That's when she noticed the car. A blue sedan sat idling 3 spaces over, its engine running. The driver wore dark sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low, despite being parked beneath the shadow of a tree. Something about the posture, the stillness, it didn't sit right. Anna paused, pretending to dig through her purse. She watched the sedan through the corner of her eye. The driver held a newspaper but hadn't turned a page since she saw him. When she moved toward her car, the newspaper shifted slightly, tracking her. Her instincts screamed. She'd been followed before. She knew surveillance when she saw it, and this was it, albeit clumsy. Sliding behind the wheel, she kept her movements relaxed, casual. As she started the engine and pulled away from the lot, she checked her rearview mirror. The sedan followed. Anna kept her speed slow, her turns deliberate, leading the sedan on a winding path through nearby neighborhoods. Then she made a sharp right onto a dead-end residential street and pulled quickly behind a large, parked delivery van. The van shielded her from the view. She switched off her headlights, unclipped her holster, and drew her service weapon, resting it on her lap. She watched. Moments later, the blue sedan crept down the street, clearly searching. The driver scanned house numbers, glancing nervously at driveways. Anna's pulse was steady. Whoever this was, they weren't police. They weren't professionals either. But they were watching her. That meant she was getting close. The sedan rolled slowly past the van. Anna crouched lower, keeping her weapon angled down but ready. She caught a clearer glimpse of the driver, a man in his 40s, unshaven, his jaw tense, scanning every driveway. He hadn't expected her to vanish so suddenly. After a few more seconds of slow cruising, the car made a hesitant U-turn at the end of the block. Anna stayed out of sight, mentally noting the car's make, model, and most importantly, its license plate. She repeated the number under her breath until she could safely write it down. Once the sedan disappeared around the corner, Anna pulled out her phone and called dispatch. "I need a plate run on a blue Toyota Camry, partial plate 4YCB732, she said. The dispatcher responded within minutes. The vehicle was registered to a small private security firm operating out of downtown LA. No open warrants, no red flags. Just another shadow in a city filled with them. Anna tucked her weapon away and started the car again. If someone was tailing her, either to intimidate or monitor her, it meant she was rattling the right cages, and that made her more determined than ever to see the investigation through. Back at her apartment that night, Anna poured herself a cup of black coffee and pinned the latest clues to her corkboard. Marble's locket, the DNA results, the cash withdrawals, Felix Morales, and now the surveillance. Pieces of the puzzle were forming edges, but the center still eluded her. Who was the woman whose blood was found beneath Marble's fingernails? Why had Charles Delacroix been so nervous, yet insisted on his innocence? and who wanted to scare her off? She stared at the board long into the night, listening to the city hum below her window, knowing the truth was out there, and someone didn't want her to find it. Anna crouched behind the delivery van, her eyes locked on the approaching blue sedan. Through the van's narrow window, she saw the driver scanning the street, his head swiveling left and right as he searched for the Crown Victoria. His movements were sharp, frantic, definitely not someone simply lost in the neighborhood. She watched him slow near her original parking spot, confusion creeping across his face. Without a sound, Anna stepped from behind the van, her badge around her neck and her service weapon drawn but angled downward. "Police!" she barked. "Turn off the engine and step out of the vehicle." Startled, the driver looked straight at her, wide eyes, mouth open. Then he slammed the car into park and bolted, throwing open the door and sprinting toward a nearby fence. He moved fast, surprisingly nimble for a man who looked past his prime. In seconds, he'd clambered over the 6-foot wooden barrier and vanished into the yard of a small house behind it. Anna ran to the fence and paused, peering over. Pursuing someone across private property without backup was risky. Protocol demanded caution. But as she calculated her next move, something on the pavement caught her attention. Near the driver's side door, a white business card fluttered slightly in the morning breeze. She picked it up and read aloud. Morales Auto Repair, 2847 Whittier Boulevard, East LA. No name, but the address was clear. Someone in a hurry had dropped it, someone who likely knew why he was being followed. Anna holstered her weapon and called in for a crime scene team to process the abandoned vehicle. Prints, registration, trace evidence, it could all help tie this man to Marble's case. But she suspected she wouldn't need to wait long to confirm his identity. The next morning, Anna drove out to the East LA address. Whittier Boulevard buzzed with life. Cars honking, street vendors shouting, salsa music leaking from a corner market. The auto shop sat sandwiched between a coin laundromat and a taco stand, its faded red sign barely readable above the metal roll-up doors. It was early, just after sunrise. Most garages were already prepping for the day's work, but this one looked deserted. No cars are parked outside, no lights on, doors shut tight. Anna parked across the street, engine off. She watched for 10 minutes. Nothing. Not a single customer or employee appeared. Crossing the road cautiously, Anna approached the shop's front door and gave it a firm knock. Locked. She walked the perimeter and found a side entrance ajar. The door cracked open just enough to raise every red flag in her training. She drew her weapon again, holding it low and steady as she pushed the door open with her foot. "Police!" she called out into the shadows. "Is anyone here?" No answer. She stepped inside slowly. The smell hit her first. Hot oil, scorched metal, rusted tools. Dust floated through light slants from dirty windows. A few workbenches lined the shop walls, scattered with greasy wrenches and engine parts. In the middle of the room sat a ceramic mug on a table, steam still curling from its top. Someone had been here. Very recently. Anna's boots were silent against the stained concrete as she moved toward the rear office. A sound, metal striking concrete, echoed from behind the wall near the back of the shop. She froze. Another clang. Then the slam of a door. "Police! Come out with your hands visible." She sprinted toward the sound, rounding the corner just in time to see a side exit swinging shut. She pushed through and emerged into an alley, bright sunlight blinding her for a split second. The man was already running, halfway down the alley. Anna gave chase, shouting into her radio for backup. The alley opened into a sprawl of back streets and alleys, a perfect place for someone to vanish. But the man wasn't built for running. Within 2 blocks, his pace had slowed, and he wheezed with every step. Anna, breathing evenly, kept the gap narrow. At the end of a narrow cul-de-sac, a high concrete wall blocked further escape. The man turned sharply, hands raised. "There's nowhere else to go, Felix," Anna called. She kept her weapon out, pointed at the ground. "I just want to talk." He pressed himself against the wall, scanning left and right. His body twitched with the adrenaline of a cornered animal. He looked older than she'd expected. Mid-50s, thick shoulders, gray flecks in his beard. His work-stained hands trembled slightly. "You're trespassing," he snapped. "Your property ends at the fence," she replied calmly. "This is public land." She stepped forward slowly. "Why'd you run, Felix?" "I don't talk to cops without a lawyer. You're not under arrest. Not yet. I just want to ask about the Delqua family." At the mention of their name, Felix's entire demeanor shifted. His jaw clenched and his gaze dropped. The fear didn't vanish. It deepened, mingling with something else. Acceptance. "I haven't worked for them in years," he muttered. "I know, but in 1993, you were their driver. That same year, Marble Dwart worked in the house as a housekeeper." Felix's eyes met Anna's, and she saw it. The recognition. The guilt. "I don't remember everyone who came and went," he said, voice faltering. Anna holstered her gun. Marble disappeared on October 15th. We found her body, wrapped in plastic, buried near Griffith Park. She stepped closer, her tone softer now. "Felix, I can arrest you right now based on the evidence connecting you to the scene. Or you can come voluntarily and talk to me. Help us find justice. For her sister." Felix's shoulders sagged. He pushed away from the wall and walked toward her, slowly, deliberately. "I've been waiting 5 years for this," he whispered. 5 years wondering when someone would ask what really happened that night. He stopped a few paces away from Anna, breathing heavily but calm now, as if surrender had brought a strange kind of peace. "I didn't kill her," he said quietly. "But I saw something I shouldn't have. I kept my mouth shut because I was scared. Scared of what they'd do to me. Scared of what I'd lose." Anna listened intently. "What did you see?" Felix glanced around the alley, the morning sun glinting off sweat on his brow. "She came to me that day, Marble. She was upset, crying. Said she was going to leave. She was going to tell someone everything. She said she couldn't take the secrets anymore." Anna felt a chill crawl down her spine. "What secrets, Felix?" He hesitated, torn between fear and conscience. Then, finally, he looked her in the eye. "You'll need to promise me protection, Detective. Witness protection, whatever you got. Because if I talk, really talk, it won't just be the Delquas who come after me." Anna gave a small nod, her voice steady. "If what you have to say helps us solve her murder, I'll get you every protection the law allows." Felix looked away for a moment, the burden of the past years written in the lines on his face. She died because someone powerful wanted her silence, and I was the coward who let it happen. Anna didn't say a word. She simply reached for her phone and radioed in for transport. The truth, long buried, was finally cracking the surface. 2 hours after the arrest, Felix Morales sat nervously across from Detective Ana Rivas inside interview room 3 at LAPD headquarters. The harsh fluorescent lighting above them cast stark shadows across the table. Anna entered the room holding a thick case file marked Duarta Marble. She placed it carefully on the table, then slid a series of photographs, face down, into the center without saying a word. Her intent was clear: build the case methodically. First, confirm Felix's connection to the victim. Then, confront him with the irrefutable evidence. "Let's start from the beginning," Anna said, her voice calm but firm. "You were employed by Charles and Geneva Delacqua from 1991 until 1996, serving as their personal driver and household handyman. Is that correct?" Felix gave a small, guarded nod. "That's right. During that time, you would have interacted with other household staff, housekeepers, cooks, groundskeepers." Felix shifted in his chair, rubbing his hands together nervously. "Sometimes, but I mostly stayed in the garage or drove them around. I kept to myself." Anna opened the folder and flipped through her notes. "Do you recall a young woman named Marble Dwart? She worked there as a housekeeper in 1993. Felix hesitated. Maybe. A lot of people worked in that house. People came and went. Anna studied his face carefully. The Delacroix told me you were more than just a driver. They said you were someone they trusted, someone they confided in. Felix said nothing. That means you likely witnessed things others didn't. Arguments, tension, secrets. She paused and turned over the first photograph. A black and white image of skeletal remains, partially wrapped in torn plastic, lay bare in a shallow grave. This is how we found Marble, buried under a hiking trail in Griffith Park. She was 26 years old when she died. Felix stared at the image briefly, then looked away, his lips pressed tightly together. She had a younger sister, Carmen, Anna continued, laying down a second photo, this one of a teenage girl from a school portrait. 17 years old when Marble vanished. She didn't report her sister missing because she was undocumented. She was terrified of deportation. Anna's tone hardened. Marble was working 2 jobs to put Carmen through school, sending money home to their mother in Mexico. She had plans, Felix, big ones, and someone took it all away with a single blow to her skull. Felix's hands began to tremble. He placed them flat on the table to stop the shaking. "I didn't want anyone to get hurt," he muttered. "What do you mean by that?" Anna leaned forward. Felix clammed up. "I mean, it's a tragedy, what happened, but I don't know who did it. I didn't see anything." Before Anna could press further, a knock came at the door. It was Lieutenant Ray Morrison. Anna stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind her. "How's it going?" Morrison asked. "He's close," Anna said. "He's rattled. The photos got to him." "Good, because we've got another issue. His nephew just called in. Says Felix never showed up to pick up his grandkids from school. He's worried. We're getting questions." Anna ran a hand through her hair. "I need more time. He's circling confession." "You've got 1 hour," Morrison said. "His lawyer's already been contacted. Once that guy walks in, it's over." Anna nodded grimly and re-entered the room. Felix looked more distressed than before. The break had clearly given him too much time to dwell on the consequences. "Felix," Anna began gently, "your family's looking for you. Your nephew says you missed picking up your grandkids. They're safe. But this situation, this secret you're carrying, could affect all of them. You can stop that from happening." Felix's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. If I talk, they'll destroy everything. My family, my job, everything I've worked for. They told me they would." Anna leaned closer. "Who? Who threatened you?" Felix looked down at the table, fixated on the crime scene photo, his jaw clenched tight. His body trembled with silent fear. "I have kids, detective, and grandkids. I've seen what people like the Delacroix can do." "I know what they can do," Anna replied. "They murdered an innocent woman, and they made you help cover it up." Felix's lips quivered. He glanced up at Anna, his expression hollow. "If I tell you the truth, promise me my family will be protected." "We'll do everything in our power to keep them safe, but I need to know. What happened to Marble Duarte on October 15th, 1993? Felix exhaled deeply and closed his eyes, like a man about to dive into deep water. "It wasn't Charles," he said finally. "Everyone thinks it was him because of the affair. But it wasn't." Anna's pulse accelerated. "Then who?" Felix opened his eyes. It was Geneva, Mrs. Delacroix. She found out about the affair, and she lost it. She killed Marble that day. The room fell into stunned silence. Anna swallowed hard. "Felix, I need you to walk me through that day." Every detail. Felix wiped his sleeve across his damp forehead. "It started in the morning. I came to work as usual. I was washing the car when I heard shouting from inside the house. Not unusual, really. But this time, it was different." He hesitated. Geneva found a letter in Charles's jacket pocket. A love letter. From Marble. Anna's pen scratched rapidly against her notepad. "I don't know what happened after that, but a few hours later, Marble showed up for her shift. Geneva called her into the study. I was in the hallway. I heard Geneva screaming, calling her a whore, a liar. Worse things. He paused, eyes haunted. Then it got quiet. Too quiet. I went to check. Geneva was just standing there, staring at Marble's body. She'd hit her with one of those heavy glass vases. There was blood everywhere. Anna struggled to maintain her composure. "What did you do?" "I panicked," Felix said. "I wanted to call someone, but Geneva begged me. She said if anyone found out, she'd blame me. She said she'd tell the police I was obsessed with Marble, that I was the one who attacked her. And so you helped hide the body." "I didn't want to," he said, voice breaking. "But I had no choice. I wrapped Marble in the plastic from the basement and put her in the trunk of my car. Geneva drove me to Griffith Park that night. I dug the hole. She stood there and watched." Anna stared at him in disbelief. "You've carried this for 5 years. I see her face every time I close my eyes," he whispered. Anna closed the folder slowly. The confession was powerful, painful, and damning. "I need you to sign a statement," she said. "After that, we'll talk about protecting your family." Felix nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. He had finally unburdened himself of the truth, and Anna was one step closer to bringing Marbelle Dwart's killer to justice. Anna stood from her chair and stepped toward the door, pausing to glance back at Felix. "You did the right thing, Felix. It took courage. And now we can finally give Marble's sister the truth she's been waiting for all these years." Felix nodded wordlessly, his expression hollowed by guilt but tinged with a fragile sense of relief. As Anna walked down the corridor to retrieve a statement form and begin the next steps, her thoughts turned to Carmen, the young woman who'd waited 5 long years for a call that would never come, who had endured countless nights wondering if her sister had abandoned her or worse. Soon, Carmen would have an answer. And Geneva Delacqua would finally have to answer for what she did. Justice was no longer buried in Griffith Park. It was walking into the light, one truth at a time. Felix's voice softened as he recounted what triggered the fatal night. "There was a letter," he began, eyes focused on the wall rather than Anna. "A love letter from Marble. Real romantic stuff. She wrote about how much she cared for Mr. Charles, how she dreamed they could have a real future together someday." Anna let him speak uninterrupted, quietly jotting notes as he relived those painful memories. "I was outside, washing Mr. Charles's car in the driveway," Felix said. "I heard Geneva's voice inside the house, screaming louder than I'd ever heard before. At first, I thought maybe she'd injured herself. But then the yelling turned ugly, violent." Anna leaned forward slightly, sensing this was the moment she had been waiting for. "Where was Charles during all of this?" she asked. "He left earlier that day, just before noon. Said he had a long day of meetings and wouldn't be back until late," Felix answered. "Geneva waited until his car was gone. After that, she started pacing the house like a wild animal trapped in a cage, like she was building up to something." Felix rose from his chair, walking slowly to the corner of the room. The weight of the memory seemed too much to bear seated. "Marble came in that evening, same as usual. I wanted to warn her, I swear I did. But Geneva was already waiting. She pulled me aside earlier that day and said if I said one word, she'd call immigration on me and my whole family." He turned back to face Anna, tears in his eyes. "My youngest daughter was only 8 years old back then. I couldn't risk it. I kept my mouth shut." He sat down again, composed himself, and pressed forward. "Geneva, let Marble clean the whole main floor. Didn't say a word to her. Then, when she was nearly done, Geneva asked her to come to the library to talk about her schedule." Anna scribbled a timestamp and location in her notes. This was the moment. Felix's voice became hoarse. "I heard shouting again. Geneva was yelling at her, calling her a homewrecker, a gold-digging immigrant trying to destroy her family. I started moving toward the door, but then it happened." He looked up at Anna. "She picked up this heavy brass candlestick from the fireplace mantel. I thought she was just trying to scare Marble, but she wasn't." Felix's hands shook. She swung it hard, caught Marble right above the ear. She didn't stand a chance, fell back and cracked her head on the edge of the stone hearth. There was blood everywhere, and Geneva just stood there, holding that candlestick like she couldn't believe what she'd done. I ran in and checked on her, but she was already gone. No pulse, nothing I could do. Anna steadied her breathing as she recorded every word. What did Geneva do next? She snapped out of it real quick, told me to clean it up, said if I didn't, she'd make sure I was deported and my family would be ruined. She gave me those plastic sheets from the garage and made me wrap Marble up. Then we carried her to my truck. Geneva said we had to bury her somewhere remote, somewhere no one would ever find her. Anna set down her pen and looked at Felix with quiet seriousness. You understand this is your chance to make things right, Felix. Are you willing to testify against Geneva in court? Felix nodded, more resolute now. I've kept this secret too long. That poor girl didn't deserve to die. It's time Geneva paid for what she did. Later that evening, Anna met with Assistant District Attorney Sarah Wilson. They reviewed the growing stack of evidence: Felix's signed confession, timeline verification, and Geneva's connection to the murder weapon. But they still needed irrefutable scientific proof, something to eliminate any doubt in court. That's when Dr. Kim at the forensics lab stepped in. We'll need to compare Geneva's DNA with the blood sample found beneath Marble's fingernails, she said. If it's a match, that'll show Geneva and Marble fought. It places Geneva physically at the scene and confirms a violent confrontation. Can we get a sample without her cooperation? Anna asked. We'll take it during the booking process. With everything falling into place, the arrest was scheduled for the following morning. Anna checked her service weapon and badge, slipped on a blazer, and drove into Beverly Hills, heart pounding. Geneva Delacroix had built a reputation as a generous socialite, a pillar of the community. But beneath the polished veneer was a woman who had killed in a jealous rage, then spent 5 years silencing the only witness with threats and intimidation. She'd worn pearls to charity galas while Marble lay buried in the dirt. Anna parked her Crown Victoria outside the Grand Beverly Hills Hotel. That morning, the Children's Hospital Foundation luncheon was in full swing. Inside, the city's most powerful and influential sipped champagne beneath dazzling chandeliers, blissfully unaware of the reckoning about to unfold. The ballroom shimmered with opulence: white linen tablecloths, crystal centerpieces, and floral arrangements more elaborate than wedding displays. At the head table, Geneva sat dressed in a sleek navy Chanel suit, a sapphire necklace glittering at her throat. The very image of sophistication. She was smiling, chatting with fellow board members about the upcoming gala. Her voice calm, her posture perfect. She had no idea the final chapter of her secret life was about to be written. Anna stepped into the ballroom, badge visible, and approached the dais with purposeful steps. Conversations hushed as eyes turned toward her. Mrs. Geneva Delacroix, Anna called, her voice firm and unwavering. You are under arrest for the murder of Marble Duarte. Gasps echoed around the room. Geneva's expression froze, her smile collapsing as she looked up at Anna, stunned. This is absurd, she said, her voice rising. You have the right to remain silent, Anna began, pulling out her handcuffs. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The sapphire necklace sparkled under the chandelier light as Geneva stood slowly, her face paling with each word. Anna cuffed her wrists and led her from the ballroom, past stunned philanthropists and journalists fumbling for their phones. Outside, beneath the California sun, justice had finally caught up with Geneva Delacroix, and Marble Duarte's voice, silenced for 5 long years, was finally heard. Geneva's high heels clicked against the marble as she was led through the hotel lobby, her pristine public image unraveling with each step. Cameras outside flashed as reporters shouted questions, eager to capture the downfall of one of Los Angeles's most prominent women. Back at headquarters, Anna processed the arrest. Geneva sat stonily in the holding room, her eyes cold and distant as she refused to answer questions without her lawyer present. When the nurse arrived to collect her DNA sample, she flinched but said nothing. Dr. Kim processed the sample within hours. The DNA beneath Marbelle's fingernails matched Geneva Delacroix conclusively. It was the final piece in the puzzle, a violent struggle etched in blood, sealed now by science. That evening, Anna drove to El Centro and found Carmen cleaning tables in the empty dining room. When Carmen saw Anna walk in, her heart raced. "Did something happen?" Anna smiled gently. "We arrested her, Carmen. Geneva Delacroix. She's going to stand trial for what she did to your sister." Carmen sank into a chair, overwhelmed. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but this time they weren't just for grief. They were for justice, for closure, for Marble. The case that had once been buried beneath the quiet soil of Griffith Park now echoed through the courtrooms of Los Angeles. And Ana Rivas knew this was why she became a detective. Not for headlines, not for praise, but to speak for the silenced, to give voice to the forgotten, to bring the truth, no matter how long it took, into the light. Geneva's entrance into the ballroom that day had been one of grace and power, her smile a masterclass in social diplomacy. But the moment Detective Ana Rivas entered through the grand archway, her badge glinting on her blazer, the room's energy shifted. Conversations stuttered, forks paused halfway to mouths, and heads turned in unison. The marble beneath Anna's feet echoed with each purposeful step as she approached the head table. Some guests whispered, assuming a purse had been stolen or a security issue had arisen. But Geneva knew better the moment her eyes locked with Anna's. For just a heartbeat, her poise cracked, and something flickered in her gaze. Fear. "Geneva Delacroix," Anna said evenly, her voice carrying across the now silent hall. "Yes," Geneva answered, voice steady, but her hand trembled slightly as it reached for her water glass. Anna revealed the handcuffs discreetly. "You're under arrest for the murder of Marble Duarte." The silence was complete. Around 300 of Los Angeles's wealthiest and most powerful sat stunned, watching as a woman they'd known for decades was accused of killing her housekeeper. A gasp rippled through the ballroom. Someone dropped a champagne flute. Geneva's mask slipped further. She looked from face to face, recognizing friends, donors, allies, all now witnesses to her disgrace. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice rising to a pitch. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is harassment. My husband will hear about this, and so will everyone else in this city." Anna stood firm. "Mrs. Delacroix, you can come quietly or not. It's your choice." Geneva stood abruptly, her chair toppling backward and skidding across the floor. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have friends in the mayor's office, with the police commissioner, and the district attorney's office. This arrest will ruin your career." But Anna had heard all these threats before. The louder Geneva got, the more desperate she sounded. Beneath the fury was pure fear. Anna moved behind her, calmly cuffing Geneva's wrists. As she read the Miranda rights, Geneva began to hyperventilate. She muttered denials, then abruptly shifted to justifications. "It was an accident," she insisted. "She attacked me first. I was defending myself in my own home." Anna noted the sudden shift, from denial to self-defense. It was common when suspects realized the weight of the evidence against them. "She was destroying my marriage," Geneva ranted as Anna walked her out of the ballroom. "She seduced my husband and thought she could take my life from me." Anna said nothing as hotel security opened a path through the stunned crowd. Several guests lifted their phones, filming the dramatic arrest. The once revered matriarch of Los Angeles society, now a suspect in a cold-blooded murder, was led away in handcuffs. "This will ruin everything," Geneva whispered as they exited. Anna's voice was calm and clipped. "You should have thought of that before you killed an innocent woman and buried her like garbage." 2 hours later, Charles Delacroix walked into the LAPD station with a top-tier criminal defense lawyer by his side. He looked pale, his expression unreadable. Anna watched through the observation window as he entered the interview room where Geneva sat, now stripped of jewelry, her expensive suit wrinkled. Their reunion wasn't what Anna expected. There were no tearful embraces or quiet reassurances. Instead, Charles sat down stiffly, arms crossed, and listened as Geneva spoke. Even behind soundproof glass, their argument was evident. 20 minutes later, Charles stepped into the hallway where Anna waited. He looked dazed, hands shaking. "Is it true?" he asked. "Did she really kill Marble?" "We have overwhelming evidence that she did," Anna replied. "She also coerced Felix Morales into helping her hide the body. We've recorded partial confessions, and DNA evidence will confirm Geneva's involvement." Charles rubbed his face, trying to process the information. "I thought she just left," he murmured. "I didn't know what happened. I wondered if she'd gone home to Mexico or found a new job somewhere. I was worried. But Geneva..." He looked toward the room his wife was in. "She was always strong, proud, but I never believed she could be violent." Anna could see the conflict in his expression. Whatever Charles had done wrong in his marriage, it was clear he hadn't been part of Marble's death. "Will you stand by your wife through the trial?" she asked gently. "I don't know if I can," he said after a long silence. "Every time I look at her, I'll remember what she did. How do I share a house with someone capable of murder?" 3 days later, Dr. Kim's call came. The lab results were in. "The blood beneath Marble's fingernails belongs to Geneva Delacroix," she confirmed. "It's a perfect match. No contamination, no lab error. The chain of custody is clean." Anna closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the finality. It was over. They had everything they needed. Later that evening, she visited Carmen Duarte again. The young woman had been waiting. Tension etched on her face as she opened the restaurant door. Anna gave a small nod. "We have enough to take Geneva to trial. The DNA evidence matches. She's going to pay for what she did." Carmen's eyes filled with tears. "Is it really over?" "It is," Anna said softly. "You'll never have to wonder again." Carmen reached out and hugged her. "Thank you." And with that, the ghost of Marbel Duarte, who had once come to America with hope, who had worked hard, who had tried to build a better life for her family, was finally at peace. Justice, long buried under layers of privilege and silence, had finally emerged into the light. Geneva's trial became one of the most closely watched events in recent Los Angeles history. The city buzzed with speculation as legal analysts dissected every aspect of the case. Prosecutors presented Felix Morales' detailed testimony, bank records showing Charles Delacroix's suspicious cash withdrawals, and, most damning of all, the DNA evidence conclusively linking Geneva to the crime scene. Witness after witness took the stand to paint a picture of a woman unraveling beneath the weight of her husband's betrayal and her own insecurities. Geneva's defense team tried to shift the narrative, claiming emotional distress and invoking self-defense, but the jury wasn't moved. After 3 weeks of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the verdict came in. Guilty. Geneva Delacroix was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison for the murder of Marbel Duarte. In the gallery, Carmen held a photo of her sister and cried, not just from grief, but from the relief that the truth had finally been heard. Outside the courthouse, Anna stood on the steps as cameras flashed and reporters called her name. She made no statements. Her job wasn't about headlines. It was about the promise she made to every victim, that their stories would be heard, that their lives mattered, that justice was possible, even after years buried in silence. That promise had been kept. In the months following the trial, the LAPD honored Ana Rivas with a departmental commendation for her outstanding dedication to solving a decades-old homicide. Felix Morales, though never charged, entered witness protection with his family, finally free from the fear that had haunted him for years. Carmen Duarte used the Victim Compensation Fund to enroll in college, pursuing a degree in social work. She wanted to help other young women navigating life in a foreign country, determined that her sister's death would not be in vain. Anna continued working her cases, carrying each victim's story with her. But she never forgot Marble, the housekeeper whose life was stolen not by a stranger, but by someone who had welcomed her into their home. Marble Dwart's name was added to the city's memorial for unsolved victims whose cases had finally found resolution. A simple plaque among many, but to Carmen, to Anna, and to all who heard her story, it meant that Marble was no longer forgotten. Justice had come. Not quickly, not easily, but it had come. The courtroom had been packed every day of Geneva Delacroix's trial, with journalists filing hourly updates and the public hanging on to each new detail. Legal analysts on television debated whether Geneva's social status and philanthropic history would influence the jury. But when the verdict was read, guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to conceal a crime, the reaction was swift and universal. Justice had prevailed. The courtroom remained silent, not out of shock, but reverence, as Judge Williams imposed the sentence. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He called it a crime of brutal betrayal, not just against the law, but against the moral fabric of a community that had, for too long, turned a blind eye to the plight of its most vulnerable. As Geneva was led out of the courtroom in shackles, her once pristine image forever shattered. The weight of her actions finally settled over her like the prison walls that would soon contain her. Meanwhile, Felix Morales, sitting quietly near the back, felt a strange sense of peace. His confession, born out of fear but delivered with courage, had ensured that Marble Dwart's death was not forgotten. And though his cooperation earned him a suspended sentence, the real reward was intangible. The burden of silence lifted, his family no longer under threat. 3 weeks later, on a crisp morning in May, Anna and Carmen returned to Resurrection Cemetery. They carried fresh lilies and white roses, Marble's favorites, and placed them at the base of the black granite headstone now etched with Marble's name and memory. The two women stood in silence, listening to the wind move through the trees, the chirp of distant birds, and the low hum of the city beyond the gates. Carmen knelt to fix a corner of the ribbon tied around the bouquet. "She was only 26, she whispered. "She had so many dreams. She was going to open a restaurant, bring our mom here. She even joked about me becoming a lawyer." Anna placed a hand gently on Carmen's shoulder. "She'd be proud of you. You gave her a voice when no one else would." Tears welled up in Carmen's eyes, but her voice was steady. "I think I finally understand what she meant when she said I could do more, not just for myself, but for others like us." Anna stood quietly while Carmen spoke to her sister's grave, sharing updates about family news and expressing the love she had never stopped feeling despite 5 years of uncertainty. "I'm sorry it took so long to find out what happened to you," Carmen whispered. "I should have pushed harder, asked more questions, called the police even though I was scared." "You did everything you could," Anna said softly. "Your sister wouldn't want you to blame yourself. She would want you to live the life she worked so hard to make possible." As they walked back toward the cemetery entrance, Carmen asked Anna about other unsolved cases involving missing immigrants and marginalized people. "There are too many," Anna admitted. "People who disappear without anyone filing reports, cases that don't get the attention they deserve because the victims don't have powerful families or political connections." Carmen stopped walking and turned to face her. "Maybe that needs to change. Maybe there should be someone specifically looking out for people like my sister, people who don't have voices in the system." Anna looked at her for a long moment. "That sounds like important work. Your sister would be proud if you decided to pursue something like that." Carmen smiled for the first time since Anna had met her. She always said I was smarter than her, that I should use my education to help people. Maybe this is what she meant. After leaving the cemetery, Anna pulled into the police station parking lot and sat in her car for a moment, reflecting on the case that had consumed 6 months of her life. The investigation had taken her from a shallow grave in Griffith Park to the highest levels of Los Angeles society, revealing that money and influence couldn't ultimately protect someone from the consequences of their actions. Geneva's pain had been real, even if her response had been unforgivable. But understanding the motive didn't diminish the crime. Whatever Geneva had suffered, it didn't justify taking a life. Marble Dwarta could finally rest in peace, knowing that her death had not been forgotten. Justice had been served, even if it had taken 5 years to arrive.